Welcome everyone to another observability clinic introducing unified analysis screens going beyond dashboards with Dynatrace. As you know, Dynatrace has a lot of great capabilities around dashboarding. I just did a clinic on power dashboarding, but on the other side, we have a lot of great screens built into the product. And here, you have probably noticed already some new screens. We call them unified analysis screens that enable you to do a lot of more things with the built-in screens, configure them and so on. But honestly, I don't know a whole lot about it. This is why I've invited my colleague Radu. Hi Radu, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thanks.
Hey Radu, quick introduction on yourself, what you do as an extension architect and why it was a wise choice for me to invite you to talk about unified analysis screens.
Absolutely. So I've been with Dynatrace for nearly 7 years now. And indeed, for the past half year or so, I've been an architect within the platform extensions team. The team as a whole, and me included, we deal with anything to do with extending Dynatrace out of the box functionality. So this means extensions in either framework, OpenKit, OneAgent SDK, all of these technologies that are at the edge of the smartscape, as we call it, we specialize in them.
Cool. And that's why, I mean, unified analysis screens is a great new capability we use internally, but we also give it to our users so that they can build their own screens that make analysis easier. And without further ado, Radu, you take it over. Please tell us what these screens actually are and how they work and how people can leverage them.
Sure thing. So what we'll be covering today is, first of all, what even is unified analysis? So I'll walk you through the concept and what it aims to achieve. We're going to go through a few of the screens just to see the art of the possible, both on the built-in side of the product, but also on the custom side. And then most importantly, I want to focus most of this session on walking you through an end-to-end example of leveraging these new screens for your own purposes. So first of all, what is unified analysis and what are the 3 pillars that it stands for? So at the very most basic, it's a new interface that we've brought to our users. It is focused on analysis workflows and most importantly, with a common user experience between them. They aim to bring in together all of our observability signals. So we know that Dynatrace can openly ingest metrics, events, and logs. And these new screens bring these signals in context, no matter what entity we're viewing. And that means that they're also bridging the gap between the built-in and the custom entities. So the previous screens that are currently in the product, we can notice as we're browsing them that there is a bit of a divide between what the product does as built-in and what we can achieve with the custom world of entities. Well, with the unified analysis concept, there's no longer this divide. Anything that can be done built-in and that the native entities can show, you'll be able to show with your custom and generic entities. So where can you find these? And let's start with the built-in world. So the first entities to adopt this new model are the Kubernetes focused ones, so workloads, namespaces, and pods. And you might have noticed already, if you're working with these types of technologies, that these screens have a slight different look and feel compared to the rest of the product. And that's because they already leverage the unified analysis screens. So we're going to walk through these in just a little bit, but let's first cover what's next to adopt this. And your users that are probably on the latest version of SaaS would have already seen a little banner that there's a different view to the built-in host screen. Well, that's because the host page now is ready to move on to the unified analysis model as well. And it will adopt the same look and feel as the Kubernetes entities and leverage this new model to show the data. But soon enough, really, everything in the platform will get this banner and we'll be ready to move on to the new model. But at this point, let's open the demo environment and browse through these screens. What makes up a unified analysis screen? And I'll take the example of a Kubernetes workload to begin with, and then we'll move on to an extension-driven screen as well. So let me find something that everyone is familiar with, and that is easy travel. So opening up a workload screen for the easy travel workload, I can see this layout, which is very much card focused. So I can see these contained areas of the screen, each of them focused on showing me some information about this entity. And this is really at the core of how these unified analysis screens are built. We are focusing on reusable components that can be brought into the context of a particular entity to then display those observability signals back to the user in a useful way. So the cards at the top, the header, the properties card, charts and lists of other entities, these are all reusable components. And these are being used all throughout the page of a unified analysis screen. So this particular one that we're looking at, we can refer to it as the details page, is once we've accessed a particular instance of an entity, what are the full details that we can get about it. But the other page can be a list view. And the list view means that we've not yet focused into one specific entity, but we're instead viewing the list of all entities of that type. So in this case, I'm viewing all of the workloads in here, and it's a listing of that type of entity. Now, let's go to the newest addition to the platform, the host page. So if I pick any one of these hosts, initially I'm greeted by the old page of the host entity. But I get a bit of a call to action like, hey, do you want to view this information in a different way? And as we switch over, the same layout and the same idea of these reusable components get re-rendered to now show us the observability signals of a host monitored by the one agent. So there's no more a unique look and feel depending on what entity is. Instead, we have a familiar layout with every single entity and a reusable concept that can be brought into context for each of these entities.
Radu, just out of curiosity, first of all, this is great, especially it also seems to be really super slick and fast. So I like that. Especially when you analyze screens, you want to switch from one screen to another. It's very easy and fast to navigate. I can see here on the charts the 3 dots. I've been curious, what's behind these 3 dots? You see that?
So each of the sections will have some actions that we can tie to it. For example, for a chart, we can browse this in the Data Explorer. So for example, if we want to see what queries are behind it and maybe modify them, so we can have the full customization that the Data Explorer brings to us. But we may also want to take different actions, like pin this onto a dashboard if we want to have a more customized view than what's offered by the unified analysis page. Setting an, just to cover the third bit, setting an alert, again, brings this metric query into the alert context if we want to also create a custom alert from it.
Yeah. This is perfect. And rather, this is exactly what people have always asked for, that we show certain information on our default screens, but then there's no way to take this information and maybe take it to a dashboard, put it on a chart, or set an alert. I think this is really helpful, and I think perfectly fits to the customer feedback we've received over the last couple of months. It's great.
Absolutely. And this is one of the built-in screens, but let me actually show you now something that was fully customized from scratch. And that's the F5 extension. People think that because it's developed by Dynatrace, we have some special access that maybe they don't have, but actually everything that's available with the F5 extension has been built using nothing more than the unified analysis concepts that are available to any Dynatrace user. So it's one of our most kind of detailed and customized extensions. And we go through different charts, both from the entity that we start off with. So for example, the F5 device itself, but then also able to pull in related entities, so the pools that are on this instance or the virtual servers that are running on it. And really, there's no limit with how much we can tailor these in terms of bringing related instances, creating more charts, bringing metrics that are useful to have in context with the same native look and feel as the rest of the product. Even having a trailing set of breadcrumbs that you can use for navigating, that's also part of the unified analysis concept.
Well, hey, and just out of curiosity, I think you said this earlier, this is not limited to the metrics or the events and the logs that we have from the one agent, but you can also pull in external data. I would assume with F5, we're pulling data in from external data sources, and all the same concept works especially well on external data sources that you have or our users have on their specific pieces of infrastructure or whatever it is that they're monitoring.
Exactly. So the concept that really makes it happen is the generic topology. Everything that we want to represent and customize and create a screen for can be visualized and represented using the generic topology. And that's actually a great segue into the next topic of how can we leverage these on our own. So we've seen what comes with the platform, but how can we create new things that are not part of the platform? And it all starts with, well, first of all, bring some data in that's not part of the platform. We have metrics, events, and logs that can be ingested into Dynatrace openly through a variety of sources. And just to kind of give a short reminder, we have dedicated integrations with Telegraph, StatsD, Prometheus, and OpenTelemetry exporters that can push metrics. We have log exporters for AWS, Azure, and even with a custom script, you can write these interactions to start pushing this observability data no matter where it's coming from. Extensions 2.0 has been the vehicle for the F5 because it leverages an SNMP data source. And that's exactly what Extensions 2.0 does at its finest, SNMP traps, or Prometheus exporters, or WMI. But it doesn't have to come from an Extension 2.0. However, once you get this data in, you kind of have a feeling that you're a bit swimming through observability signals and you don't really have anything to organize it and really bring it to life. And that's where the missing pieces come in of the generic topology, starting to create instances of new entities based on these signals, and then defining relationships between them as well. And a unified analysis screens is just the eye candy that's kind of on top of that topology. How do I really visualize this in a way that's useful for that technology and for the workflows that I find myself doing on a day-to-day basis working with it? And Extensions 2.0 actually can deliver these. It doesn't have to have an SNMP data source. It can just communicate the topology and the unified analysis screens. And that's actually what we'll be doing in our example today. So for our example, we'll be building just a basic extension, no data source needed. We'll just write a YAML file where we'll define our topology and our relationships and the screen definitions. As part of the Extensions 2.0 framework, as a measure of security, we need to sign it just so that Dynatrace recognizes that this is an officially developed extension. We'll deploy it using our hub tile where we can upload a custom developed extension. But also, if you want to automate these, don't think that you have to go through the manual steps on your own. We have a developer's toolbox for extensions. It's on our Dynatrace open source repository on GitHub. And you can use that to generate, for example, the certificates, build and upload the extension. And just as a freebie there, we'll be seeing that I'm using a bit more automation on that just so that we waste as little time as possible during this demo. But if users want to get an inspiration of how those scripts are built, that's available on this Observability Clinic's GitHub repo as well. So anything that we see in this episode will be there ready to use. Now, one final slide before we actually introduce the concept that we're working with today. Because at the moment, we don't really have too much documentation on unified analysis on the official pages. The only way to see what's possible and know what restrictions are to certain bits of these screens is to actually browse the schemas that are available with the Dynatrace environment API. And those will give you, in a very text-heavy format, exactly what you can put at every step of the YAML, what are the restrictions, and how to build it. However, for Visual Studio Code users, the support for YAML extension also allows you to set these schemas up for automatic validation. And as you can see on the little video that's been playing, once you set that up, you'll start getting hints for what's possible at every step of the way, and also auto completions as you start building this YAML. So onto our actual demo scenario. And I wanted to kind of get everyone's mind off of normal scenarios of let's monitor this technology, this processor, this something else. And let's imagine a futuristic company where we need to monitor a whole fleet of smart taxis that are pushing these observability signals into Dynatrace. And it's a good concept because we can imagine a few of these taxis being operated together as part of a fleet. And that already gives us two types of entities. And we can imagine that maybe a fleet has a location that it's operating in, an identifier, and it's maybe pushing metrics such as how many cars do I have, how many are busy and available, how many customers are queuing up right now to get a taxi from me. Whereas for a taxi, we might again have an identifier, the class of taxi, whether it's a limo or a classic or an executive car, the registration number, and it's maybe concerned with more mechanical signals like the speed that it's running at, the engine temperature, or how many days until it needs to go into the service for a revision. And this builds a really nice plateau for us to actually start creating something out of nothing. And my simulation is available also on the repository, so you can leverage this for your own demos as well if you want to, and that's what we'll be using today.
Really cool. Just a reminder, folks, if you are wondering about that link, that GitHub repository, you can find the link in the description, either on, if you watch this on YouTube, on the YouTube description, or on Dynatrace University, but it's basically in the Dynatrace-Perf Clinics GitHub organization. I'm sure you'll find it there.
So one other thing that's bundled together with that repository, it's also this little starter project template that I've built especially for first-time developers. So within the scripts folder, you'll find this additional automation, and all you have to do is just add the URL to your Dynatrace environment, and then either a token or with the .env you can point to an environment variable, which is what I'm doing for a bit of an additional layer of security. So once you get started, all you have to do is just move into the scripts folder, and you can start running these scripts. So the initialize is the first one that I'm doing. This will generate for me the certificates that I need to sign. Will connect to my Dynatrace environment and upload my certificate in the credentials vault, so that Dynatrace knows that anything signed with the certificate comes from a trusted developer. The certificates are then placed in here, and you can also work with your own if you have them already. Where we will be building our extension is in the extension folder. So I'll just create an extension .yaml file. This is where we'll be defining everything. And before I start, I don't have any schema in here. So I'll just do the download schemas. I'll just run that, and I can place any version in here. And as you can see, the script is just downloading all of the raw schemas that the unified analysis screens and anything to do with an extension actually is based on. The advantage is for VS Code users, you already have a workspace settings in here that would link those schemas to your extension YAML. So that now when we start writing our extension, we can see that it's already linked in here and recognized. And as I've said before, the minimum information that we need is the name of the extension, and it must start with custom. So let's call this observability clinic. The author, and it already tells me that I need to provide a name. So I'll just add myself. And then I can also hover, and it's saying, hey, for this to be valid, you still need version and minimum Dynatrace version. And this is really helping along, especially if this is the first extension that you're building. So this is the very first version of this extension that we're building. And then the minimum Dynatrace version that we're targeting is, well, we've downloaded the schemas for 1.235, so we'll target the same schema version as well. And this is all that is needed to communicate this, this extension to Dynatrace. But of course, for our scenario, we want to start building a topology. So first of all, allow me one moment to restart the simulation because I noticed that it stopped.
While you're doing this, thank you so much. I want to just also remind people on the Performance Clinic Git repository, you have uploaded not only the instructions to how to build the extension, the tutorial, but also I think your smart taxi load generator. So that means you can really, everyone that is following this, if you want to become, if you want to get a heads up to Uber or to other taxi companies, you can already test and build your own observability for your own fleet of smart taxis. It's really great idea, Radu, by the way. It's a great, great use case.
Thank you. So if I look in my environment and I just type one of the bits of text that appears on these metrics, I can see that they're already in here, but they're not really associated with much. I have some data in there, but now let's shape it and let's actually attach it to some entities. And because typing code is a bit less visual sometimes, and for me to understand something, it helps if I'm doing it in a visual way. These are the streams of metrics coming into Dynatrace. And to be able to identify and create a topology efficiently, I need to start thinking about, okay, how am I going to identify my entities and create instances from these entities? So one of the first things that I'll say is whenever you see the dimension of fleet.id, I know that this identifies a fleet entity. So I'll use this to create entities of the smart fleet type. I'll do the same for the taxi, but you'll notice that I also have a fleet location on some of these metrics. So I'll tell the topology that, hey, on the metrics where there's also a fleet location, extract this and add it as an attribute to the fleet. With the taxi, I can do the same thing. So where you see a taxi ID, use that, but also use the fleet ID because the taxi ID might repeat itself throughout my entire organization, but it is unique in the context of a fleet. So I'm extracting both of these IDs to uniquely identify a taxi. And again, I can see that some of these metrics have a taxi class and a registration, and I'm saying extract these as attributes for my taxi entity. Now, the most important bit is that because some of these metrics, and namely the taxi ones, are linked to both a fleet and a taxi, I can use them as the basis for a relationship between these entities and say, hey, when you see both of these entities on that metric, please establish the relationship that the taxi is an instance of that fleet that appears in there. And that's the basis of what we're creating with the YAML. So now that we have this concept covered, let's see how can we apply it into the topology section of the YAML. So we can do the topology. Types is one of the sections, and relationships is another section. And we can see that the schema already auto-completed some of the structure for me. So the name will be the internal name of how we want to identify these types. So we'll call them Easy Taxis Smart Fleet for the Smart Fleet, and we'll call this a Smart Fleet. The ID pattern is exactly what we've discussed with establishing a unique ID for it. So we can say this is fleet. And then with the curly brackets, we can point to one of the dimensions that's available within our data. So fleet.id within the curly brackets would be extracted as a value from the dimensions of our metrics. For the name pattern, I want it to be a bit more nicely named. So I'll say this is smart fleet, and in brackets, again, extract that fleet ID so that I can also distinguish between them at first glance. Now, this is the cool bit. With the icon pattern, we can actually customize a little bit the feel of that entity, and we can access these on Dynatrace's custom barista styles website. And this is actually publicly available for anyone who wants to get the look and feel of Dynatrace, including the icons that are used within our product. So in here, we can actually pick up any of these names and associate it to our entity. So maybe we want to represent the fleet as a cluster, and we have this entity that is called cluster here as well. So all I have to do is just say cluster, and this will be automatically resolved and customize the look of my entity. The source type, I will say that this is metrics that I'm ingesting, and I'm going to map it to those metrics that I want to take into this rule. So everything in the simulation is prefixed with custom easy taxis. And then for the fleet metrics, they also have fleet after that. The next bit here is attributes that I want to extract. And this is where I said that we want to extract a fleet ID from the fleet ID dimension. And again, it's that curly bracket notation to get a value. And we also said that we have a location for this fleet, and the pattern is the fleet dot location. And now what I also need to do here is just add another rule. And I'll actually copy the first part because it would be very much the same. And I'm telling it, hey, also, by the way, establish the same entity from metrics that belong to the taxi, because the fleet ID is present there as well. And I want to have it in common so that I can establish that relationship. But for this one, we don't have any attributes to extract. So we'll just leave it with the role default as well. And this is how I identify my smart fleet. Because the simulation also pushes logs, we can also add another source type here that also, when you see logs and they have a fleet ID, bring them in together in the same boat. And now I'm ready to start defining my second type, which will be the taxi. So the smart taxi will have a very similar layout. So a smart taxi, and we'll start defining the rules. The ID pattern will be just taxi, but also contain the fleet.id and the taxi.id so that we have it unique enough that we're not bothered by it. If we don't want to customize the look and feel for an entity, this icon pattern is actually not needed. So we can just leave the default icon that's generated for us. The instance name pattern, again, smart taxi, and the same format that we have here. So the taxi.id to help us distinguish between them. And This one will have the prefix of the custom easy taxis taxi. And all of these taxi metrics will have attributes, the taxi ID, which is going to be extracted from the taxi.id dimension. We might have the registration number, which is extracted from taxi.registration. And of course, we have the class of the taxi, so we can put it as class and extract this from, again, a pattern that is taxi.class. And because I have logs being pushed as well, actually from these taxis, I want to again create another rule that does not aim to extract any attributes because my logs don't have the same attributes as my metrics, and instead leave it a bit more free and just mention that, hey, logs, once you find the taxi ID, please associate them with my taxi entity as well. So the taxi is a bit more short when defining it. And the other thing that is left is to define the relationship between them. So the source type will be the metrics, and I can be free here with my pattern. So anything that belongs to custom easy taxis, evaluated whether you can create a relationship. You'll know based on these rules at the top, which is the taxi and which is the fleet. And we just say that it goes from the easy taxis, smart taxi, to the easy taxis, smart fleet. And the taxi will be a child of the fleet. So I can just use the control space shortcut. And because I have those schemas linked here, I can see what available relationships I have in there. So now these will be interlinked together, and we haven't published this yet. So let's do exactly that. We have another convenience script here that we can use. So the build and upload, that will just use the DTCLI. We'll check whether it's already in there, and maybe we need to make room for it by deleting a previous version and then uploading and activating that last version. So one thing that I want to point out, as soon as we upload it, Dynatrace receives all of the assets that we communicate with it. So we can already go into our settings page and check out the topology model section. And we can already see in here that we have two new types created for us, the smart fleet and the smart taxi, and a relationship that's being created between the smart taxi and the smart fleet.
Just want to say, really impressive. This is really extremely powerful, especially with all of the different relationship models, and that you can really give so much flexibility on extracting different pieces of your metrics and then connecting them, and then also the naming. I wasn't aware that this is this powerful. This is really, really amazing.
Absolutely. And one thing that people also don't realize, as soon as we create a new type, Dynatrace will auto-generate some unified analysis screens for us.
Oh, cool.
We can access these straight away with a simple URL pattern at the moment. And I think later on, these will make their way into a part of the UI as well. But for now, we just need to go to UI /entity/list, and then type the type of entity that we want to list out, for example, to access the list view of the unified analysis screen. So I'll go to my smart fleet first, and I can see that the list page is already generated for me. I have the three fleets that I'm working with. And even as I'm clicking on one of these entities to open it up, I already have a bit of a layout created for me. So I have the attributes already displayed in there. And because I'm kind of using common metrics between the taxi and the fleet, sometimes the system may not know exactly if they should be listed on the fleet side or on the taxi side. On the smart taxis, if I just replace this with a smart taxi, I'm also going to be able to show all of these taxis and open up one of these as well. So for these, it already went one step further and started associating the logs. And it might be that it just needs a couple of minutes to start linking other signals like the events and the actual metrics as well, since these are quite new entities that we've published in there.
This is really cool. And the so you said the way to get to these entities is obviously we now see it on the top. I mean, with the list, there was a nice hint on how you can actually craft these links. And you said what they're working on is that we also will see maybe entries in the menu somewhere of these entities, yeah, to get to these screens, yeah.
For now, we're just using these patterns, and maybe you just create a small dashboard. We do that, for example, for all of our extensions, where we just put markdown tiles with the links to the type of entity, and then that's a really easy shortcut into browsing all of the entities in there. For a details page, you can just put the ID of that entity on just UI/entity without the list part. And that will open up one of these pages. So let's start. Yeah, sorry, did you want to ask something?
No, yeah, I was just like wondering. So now you've basically shown us how in the extension you define your relationships and your entities. So I really like your visualization. This is the data that comes in, fleets and taxis. This is how you can connect them. The connection basically means Dynatrace immediately knows or builds an entity model with relationships and knows what metrics are important. Now my question is, can we customize those screens?
Absolutely. And we can see that more and more data starts getting associated as we're getting more data actually linked to these new entities, because before then, these didn't exist. So we can see some events being associated, the logs that are being pushed. But yes, let's customize one of these. And maybe let's start with the smart taxi. So the way to do this, and as I'm going through it, I know that my topology works, so I'll just minimize that. Maybe let me just drop on a new line here, and I'll just minimize that whole section since I'm kind of done with it. And now the screens, well, no surprise, they're in the screens section of the YAML, and they need to be defined for each entity type. So let's start with the taxi. So we'll use the easy taxi smart taxi, and the two pages that I've talked about are available from the details settings for the details page, and these are the default settings, and then the list settings for the list page, and again these are the default settings. Now if we actually want to customize it, and at this point it also helps if we split the screen a little bit and take a look at maybe what's missing here. And the first bit that's missing, well, the taxi metrics, I want to actually show something in there. And this is the details page that we're customizing, so we'll work with just this. To start customizing it, the first step is to not auto-generate a layout. And then that allows us to essentially specify a list of cards that should be rendered here in our layout. And the types of cards that we can use are chart groups. These are cards specialized in showing charts. The entities list, these cards can show both a list of entities and also charts related to that list of entities. And then events similar to the events card here that will show us events being linked to this entity. So let's start with our taxi metrics, which we'll define as a chart group, and we'll call this taxi metrics. The card section just defines, okay, which cards should be defined where, but to actually define these, you'll have a section for each of these. So charts cards, entities list cards, and events cards are all sections within the YAML. We'll use the same key in here that we've used. So to say that this is the definition for this card that I'm referencing there. The display name, let's call it Smart Taxi Metrics. And we can start tailoring, okay, how many charts do we want visible? So let's say maybe that we want 3 charts visible at any given time. And well, no surprise, we need to display the charts that are part of it. The metrics that we're using, so a taxi communicates the speed, the engine temperature, and the days to revision. So let's name our charts appropriately. So the engine temperature, the speed, and the days to revision. As part of each of these entries, we'll have to define the metrics that are part of the chart, and we have to use a metric selector for it. So at this point, because we don't have too complicated metrics, all that we have to do is just give the metric key in there, and that should be enough. So in this case, this is the key for the engine temperature, and I'll just copy this because they're very similarly named. Sorry. And paste it for the other charts in here as well. So the speed will be called just speed, and the other one is just called days to revision. So I can save this, increment the version of my extension because I've made some updates, and just rerun the build and deploy. Because this convenience script also activates the extension and we're just working with screens, it takes literally a minute or even less, and we can refresh our screen to see the effects. So let's just give it a few more seconds. And I'm sure
just a quick question on this, the metric selector, that means I can really use, it's already here, you can really use any metric expression then?
Absolutely, yes.
Awesome.
So it has the same capability as the Data Explorer and the metric selector, basically from anywhere else within the
and basically, and then the entity selector is clear because it's focused on the entity that we're looking at. So I don't need to specify an entity selector, but with the metric selector, I can do any metric expression. I can even do calculations or whatever I want.
Exactly, and that's actually a good point. We can see that we have our metric selector in there, but there's also a filter to this particular smart taxi. That's been automatically added by Dynatrace because we're already zoomed into one of these entities.
Perfect.
And as a matter of fact, to just clean these things up, we don't even need unified analysis. We have metrics metadata that's available where we can just reference these metrics by their key. So let's just grab the engine temperature, for example, and say we want to add some metadata. The unit will be counted because we don't have a Celsius degrees available as a unit, but then we can say that this is the engine temperature and give a description as well, temperature of the engine. And I'm not going to do that for all of them, but I will just save this and publish another version. And we should be able to see that the engine temperature will have cleaned up here because now Dynatrace knows, hey, I can refer to this by a more common name, by a more nicer human readable name.
This is extremely powerful, so customizable. Wow.
So in just a few seconds, I've already added another piece of information that makes my life easier when dealing with these observability signals.
One more question, just a quick one. If I specify a metric selector here with multiple dimensions, is this also possible?
Absolutely. So we can use the metric selector and add a split by.
Cool.
And then again, mention the dimensions that I want to split by in there, but you will always be zoomed into one entity. So
of course, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. This is really great.
Now, let's say that I noticed that there's no way for me to get back to the fleet that this taxi is part of. So let's add a property here that allows us to do exactly that. And in here, we can use the properties card, which is something that we can customize. And we can rename attributes if we don't like the default name, but we can also create relation type properties in here. And now I can say that I want to define a relation type property, and it means that I need to define the actual relation that it's based on. And I say I want to display the easy taxis smart fleet that has a relationship that this taxi is a child of. And because I don't know the details of this taxi in advance, we have this special variable called entity conditions that will automatically resolve to whatever this entity is that I'm currently viewing. So it's a generic way of defining this relationship and be able to bring that in the context of this entity. And I'll call this, let's say, why not mother fleet. And again, increase the version of the extension, build and upload, and we should be able to see that property show up in there, allowing us to drill down essentially from this current entity to the smart fleet that we have a relationship on. It's pretty much the basic entity selector from Dynatrace, but with this added variable that simplifies things a little bit. So let's refresh that. And now we have a link to that entity, and it's called mother fleet. And it's not a direct attribute, but it's something that we've added relationally, and we can now cross drill down between these entities as part of our workflow.
I'm speechless. This doesn't happen a lot, but it just opens up so many opportunities. I'm thinking of, I'm doing a lot of work on DevOps and site reliability engineering. I think this is a great way to pull metrics or push metrics from your different CI/CD tools, and then model screens, like you have your build environment and you have your builds, or you have your tests and your individual test runs. This is great. Blown away. And it seems there's even more stuff that you're coming up here, because there's so many options in the schema here.
Absolutely. So we can probably spend a whole day or even more going through the nitty-gritty and the tiny details of what's possible, but at least I wanted to give some core concepts.
Exactly.
And perfect. How about another one where on the fleet screen, we also list out the taxis that are part of this fleet. And that's one of the cards that I didn't get a chance to talk about yet. So let's add it in the layout definition for the smart fleet. So we'll start cards, and the card that we want to show is actually a entities list. So let's call it fleet list taxis. And we'll copy this over. And of course, we have an entities list card section where we can define all of these cards in detail. So our fleet list taxis will list we'll have a page size of 5, so we'll have some pagination in there. I don't want to display any charts, but I do want to be able to expand the details. So, and then the details will have 2 charts in there. So I'll once we get it visual, I will explain how these work exactly. Until then, we need a entity selector template. So how are we going to pick up these taxis? And we'll say that it's type easy taxis, smart, not fleet, but taxi, where we have a relationship, again, that special entity conditions variable. So list me all of the taxis that are children of this fleet. We probably want to also give this a nice display name. So taxis part of this fleet. And then we have a couple of options here, actually. It's quite powerful. We can display columns, which can bring in just text detail, not necessarily a metric. And everything that we define will be in the context of the pooled entity, not of the root entity. So not the fleet, but the taxi. And maybe I want to display here the taxi, the class, as we called it. So what class of taxi this is. And we'll just give it a display name of class. Maybe I want another attribute because we also have that registration number. So let's bring that into context as well. And this one, we called it registration number. I'll just label it simply as registration. And maybe I actually want to define some charts as well. So the charts really, they're nothing more different. So I already have the engine temperature and the speed. I'll just do these two charts as part of my listing of these taxis as well. So I can just come up here and just paste that and reuse what I've defined earlier. And it's already applied within the context of every single listed taxi in there. So that's all that I need really. Increase the version again, upload and deploy that. And let's see exactly how what we've defined in the YAML gets rendered within the UI. So let's get rid of this informational one for now. Okay, so my card got listed in here. I have the taxis part of this fleet. Every taxi is rendered. And the fact that I say display charts false may be a bit misleading, but it just refers to that at the top of this card, I don't want to display any charts that are aggregated across all of these taxis. However, I did say that I want to enable the details expandability. So this means that for every taxi, I am able to expand the row and I'm able to get these charts that I've listed in here. So the temperature and the speed for each individual chart, but not aggregated at the top.
Wow.
And the two attributes are just listed as their own columns in here with just flat text content.
This is really powerful. And then you have on these charts, you have your action items again, like your 3 dots, and you can, I mean, you have all the options here, right? You can change the aggregation. You can then do the pin to a chart, get to the data explorer. I mean, this is extremely powerful.
Exactly. And one of the things that we're working on, and I think they might be already part of the schema to some extent, I personally didn't get a chance to play with them yet, is add your own actions in here.
That would be great, because one thing that I could envision is you want to maybe drill to another dashboard, or you want to, I don't know, whatever action it is, you want to get from there to a different point here. Yeah. Wow. Is there just a quick question? There's a lot of information, obviously, and a lot of options here in the schema for the extensions. Is this all documented as well? I would assume there's like rich documentation on it, or is it more? I mean, you're sharing all of this example also in the GitHub repository. Are there other areas where people can look for more information?
So the documentation for the user, for the unified analysis screens will come very soon. So the next 1 or 2 months, we'll have user-focused documentation. For now, it's a bit developer-focused documentation in a sense that the schema will give you restrictions and what's meant to be behind each of these attributes, but it's not in a user-friendly way at the moment. As a developer, you're very comfortable with reading this information, but very soon we'll have actual user-friendly documentation as well.
Cool, that's great to hear. I mean, but what you're doing here is just, this is gold, right? I mean, this recording alone will inspire
Absolutely.
a lot of people.
So that's why that's why I wanted to go through an end-to-end view of these, how to build them, and at least at a good level, users to be able to start implementing this. And I don't know, how are we doing with time? How many of these?
Yeah, I think we're getting at close to the top of the hour. So if there's anything else you need to show, then definitely do it. But I think we're already in a good shape.
Well, let's just throw in a quick one in there. So let's say I wanted to navigate with the breadcrumbs. How would I be building these for myself? They are actually part of the static content of both the details page and the list page. So I'll just add it so that we can go to all of our smart fleets in one action in there. And of course, you just call breadcrumbs, and we have a few types of breadcrumbs in here. So we can see no ops, entity references if we want to go to a specific one, or lists of entities, which is what we'll be using. So no op, as the name kind of implies, is a zero operation. It doesn't do anything, but it lets you maybe add a bit of flair to it. So let's call this Easy Taxis Ltd. And then our next breadcrumb will be going back to the list of all entities. And in here, we can use a selector or just a simple type. And for the type, of course, I know that this is the Easy Taxis Smart Fleet that I want to go back to, and I'll go to the list of all those types. So let's quickly push this over as well. And give it a few moments, and we should be able to refresh.
Here we go.
And we have a nice little namespace here that, hey, we're working with Easy Taxis Limited data. And then we can use the actual clickable breadcrumb to go back to the list of all the fleets.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's everything is customizable. So you'll be able to define filters for these, bring in more details here, modify the icon here, even the banner and the message and the breadcrumbs. So it's all reusable, and it's all at your fingertips to customize it for your data.
Phenomenal. This is all I can say. And I mean, kudos first of all to you for building this type of demo and showing this. Obviously great, kudos to the team that actually built all of this, the product team behind the scenes. Thank you so much for that. This is just opening up so many new opportunities and possibilities. I'm just like, use cases explode in my head, like, and I know what I wanna now build. Radu, I know you're part of a bigger team, and you are obviously doing this on a regular basis because you've built extensions. And perfect. Like if I would have known it's coming. Do you want to spend a word on your team?
Yeah, so there's 10 of us in the platform extensions team, and we deal with all of these technologies. So extensions 2.0, unified analysis screens, OpenKit, SDKs, custom built middleware. We can get pulled into any kind of engagement. We can do an assessment to see if anything is doable, and that's typically 1 to 2 days. We can do workshop and custom tailored training. That's typically half a day or a full day. And within 2 to 10 days, we can custom build any solution for you if you need us to.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. I mean, obviously, you now showed everybody how everybody can build this themselves, but it's always great to have the opportunity to work with a team like you. And then, if somebody wants to then hand it off to you, you're building it or you're training them. That's really great.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. Any additional links we have? Maybe anything that you want to highlight?
So like you're reading my mind, yes, we do have some links to the GitHub especially. So everything you've seen in this session is up for grabs. You can play with it yourself. We're not keeping it just hidden in a cupboard somewhere. So there'll be a GitHub repo to all of these utilities. The DT-CLI still remains the official toolbox. The scripts that I've used, I just added a bit of flair on top of it, but at the core, I'm still reusing that toolbox. We have some documentations around extensions 2.0 in general, and a blog that introduces a bit the concept of these new 2.0 extensions and mentions the generic SNMP device or the F5, just so that you can get a bit of a more broader understanding of the framework.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Radu, I would love to invite you back at a later stage, because I think it's important that we do these hands-on tutorials to really teach people. I'm sure there is more cool stuff that is coming, as you said. So I would love to have you back in a couple of months, and then we'll do another update session.
Sure thing, absolutely.
Thank you. With this, goodbye. If you're watching this on YouTube or on Dynatrace University, please make sure in the description of this session, you'll find also all the relevant links on Dynatrace University. We also upload the slide deck, and you have Radu's name now. I'm pretty sure it's easy to track him down. In general, for any questions, never hesitate to use the chat feature in the product itself. Also, we have a very strong Dynatrace community.dynatrace.com, where you can also ask questions. Yeah, happy building unified analysis screens. All the best, stay healthy. Thank you, Radu. Bye-bye.
Bye.